Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. We are setting out on a truly wild and ambitious journey today. We're going to try and wrap our heads around an astonishing 400,000 years of human history. We'll be charting the rise of massive empires, devastating collapses, and the sheer incredible survival of one of the world's most ancient and vibrant regions. That's right, we are looking at the epic history of India.
Okay, let's dive into this because we've got a massive chronological roadmap to navigate today. We'll start with the dawn of Indian civilization, move into the first great empires, navigate through the sultans to the Mughals, examine the British Raj, and finally wrap up with the fight for independence.
Section 1. Dawn of Indian Civilization.
To really grasp India's roots, we have to look way back, like deep into the past. We're talking traces of human activity, cave paintings, stone tools, dating all the way back to somewhere around 400,000 BC. But it isn't until a few thousand years BC that we start seeing truly sophisticated societies. By 1500 BC, you have this massive first civilization collapsing, which completely clears the board for a new cultural root system to spread across the region by 1000 BC.
Now, what's absolutely fascinating here is the stark contrast between these two foundational groups. First, you have the Harappan civilization. These guys were master urban planners, settled right along the Indus River with writing systems and advanced architecture. And then, around 1500 BC, they just vanish. Poof, possibly due to floods, maybe invaders, we aren't entirely sure. But replacing them, the Vedic Aryans. These were nomadic migrants, bringing an early form of Sanskrit, fiercely loyal tribal identities, and this deep, inward-looking philosophical focus that quite literally rewired the cultural DNA of the entire region.
And the way they established that cultural bedrock was through the Vedas. These are 4 sacred texts considered the oldest Hindu scripts. But they weren't just religious guidelines. They introduced a strict 3-tier social system of priests, warriors, and commoners. And they planted this really profound philosophical seed. The idea was that salvation and true happiness come from living an ethical, moral life based on your specific place in the world. And you know, that is a concept that still strongly pulses through modern Hinduism today.
Which brings us to Section 2, the first great empires.
So as these early tribal settlements grew, trade obviously flourished, and we start seeing these grand, unifying northern states emerge, like Magadha. And this ushers in the mighty Mauryan Empire in the 4th century BC. It's widely considered the first true Indian imperial power. They were building incredible temples, vast libraries, you name it. But the story takes this amazing twist with Emperor Ashoka. After fighting this tremendously bloody, devastating war to conquer the kingdom of Kalinga, Ashoka is just horrified by the violence. He actually converts to Buddhism and totally flips the script, transforming his entire empire's stance to one of strict nonviolence. And this brilliantly illustrates the kind of historical whiplash you see over the following centuries. For example, fast forward to the Gupta Empire, and you get this beautiful golden age for northern India. We're talking peak cultural flourishing, law, order, and expanding territory through peaceful marital alliances. It's very stable. But skip ahead a bit to the arrival of the early Muslim sultans, and the dynamic abruptly, violently pivots. It's a really jarring shift from classical peace to this new era of militaristic incursions, the defeat of native kingdoms, and the destruction of Hindu temples.
Moving right along to Section 3, Sultans to the Mughals.
Okay, the Delhi Sultanate era, total chaos. It was effectively a violent revolving door of empires. You've got the slave dynasty getting ousted by the Khiljis, who then get replaced by the Tughlaqs, who get totally destabilized by Timur in 1398, then usurped by the Sayids, and eventually overthrown by the Lodis. Seriously, being a ruler during this time was practically a workplace hazard. This endless, chaotic game of musical chairs finally crashes to a halt in 1526 when Ibrahim Khan Lodi gets killed on the battlefield at Panipat.
And the guy who won at Panipat? Babur. His victory birthed something entirely new for the region, the Mughal Empire. This Turkic-Mongol power did what all those previous dynasties just couldn't manage. They actually survived and stabilized. They didn't just conquer territory, they held on to it for over 2 centuries. And they did it by strategically synthesizing existing local cultures with their own. That synthesis triggered immense cultural growth and gave us architectural marvels that still define India visually today. I mean, this is the era that created the Great Taj Mahal.
Section 4. The British Raj.
So, as the 18th century rolls in and the Mughal Empire starts to fracture, there's a totally different kind of power waiting in the wings, the British East India Company. Think of them as a heavily armed mega-corporation. They've been creeping into the region, slowly escalating their economic and military control. But by 1857, local anger finally hits an absolute boiling point. The Indian Mutiny of 1857 starts as just a localized revolt by soldiers in Meerut, but it catches fire and explodes into what's known as the First War of Indian Independence. Now, the British eventually quelled it, but it permanently shattered the geopolitical dynamic in the region.
And the fallout from that mutiny is actually highly ironic. Instead of kicking the British out, it caused a massive escalation in their involvement. Queen Victoria literally issues a declaration stating that India would now be ruled directly in the name of the British Crown. So the East India Company gets booted, and heavy-handed, direct control by the British monarchy steps in. But, and this is a huge but, those intense nationalist sentiments that sparked the mutiny, they weren't extinguished, not at all. They were just simmering beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment. Finally, Section 5, the fight for independence. Let's move to the 20th century and see how this builds. Because this fight for rebirth was a grueling process of trial and error, led largely by Mahatma Gandhi and the Indian National Congress. Gandhi's tactics were basically a masterclass in constant escalation. After World War I, he tests the waters with the non-cooperation movement. Then, by December 1929, he ramps it up to massive civil disobedience, just flat-out refusing to obey British orders, which led to mass arrests and incredible personal sacrifices. Still undeterred, right around the era of World War II, he launches the ultimate ultimatum, the massive Quit India movement.
All of these persistent, non-violent efforts really started compounding. Even through major setbacks like the failed roundtable conferences in the 1930s, the pressure just kept mounting. Then, World War II hits, forcing India into a conflict it didn't choose and fundamentally draining Britain both militarily and financially. By the time the war ends, you have a newly elected, much more sympathetic Labour Party in power back in Britain. They looked at the simmering, exhausted subcontinent and, well, they saw the writing on the wall.
And that culmination leads us right here, to a singular, triumphant year, 1947. After literally centuries of empires rising and falling, brutal conquests, brilliant golden ages, and decades of relentless, grinding pushback against the British Crown, the moment finally arrived. As the clock ticked from August 14th to August 15th, 1947, India officially emerged onto the world stage as a sovereign, independent nation.
So what does this all mean? It leaves us with this final, genuinely profound question to chew on. How does a civilization that has absorbed thousands of years of completely different empires, philosophies, religions, and conquerors go about shaping its identity in the modern world? India's history isn't just a list of names and dates, you guys. It is an absolute masterclass in cultural synthesis and pure resilience. I really hope this explainer gave you a powerful framework to understand this epic timeline and leaves you eager to explore how those deep, ancient roots are still driving modern India forward today. Thanks so much for joining me, and keep learning.